Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Chris Whaley. He's the founder of Escape to Expand, working with teams on topics like resilience, conflict management, and teamwork. He worked in the HR field for many years before founding his consultancy. So how did a guy with degrees in aerospace and industrial engineering end up in HR? I'm really interested to find out. So welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Chris.
Thanks very much, Neil. Happy to be here.
So as I mentioned, you got degrees in aerospace and industrial. The first one was in aerospace. So what was the motivation to study aerospace engineering?
To be honest, when I was a kid, I'm from the last century, and Star Wars came out when I was young, and I really fell in love with the idea of science and what might come in the future, and so I wanted to work in that field, and so I got that degree in aerospace engineering, thinking I might work for a big aircraft company or maybe even NASA. But about the time I got my degree, that the aerospace industry was kind of collapsing. So I thought, maybe not the best time to go in there for myself. And so I went ahead and got my master's degree in industrial engineering to kind of broaden out what my background was. So that was something I hadn't really planned on doing, before that point, but found out later on that that was actually a good step for me.
Oh, okay. So you got your degree in aerospace and you went ahead and did your industrial engineering degree right away, or was there any space in between?
I pretty much went right away and did that. And my thinking was I did not want to move ahead like for a doctorate or something like that because I had worked with a lot of professors, and the professors I enjoyed working with the most were the ones that had a lot of real world practical experience to go along with the kind of philosophical or book learning, as we call it in the South. So I loved that combination. And so I knew I didn't want to pursue too far of an advanced degree until I had more real world experience. But I felt that that industrial engineering with that bigger focus on people and how engineering works with people, from human factors and simulations to systems thinking, that really kind of sparked my interest to see, where else could I take an engineering mindset that wasn't necessarily, doing calculus and calculating aircraft structure loads and things like that.
Understood. All right. So now you have two engineering degrees. What type of work did you do after finishing school?
So I worked at a few different places. One of probably the most interesting was the Knoxville Police Department. I was a crime analyst there, so a civilian, but it was fun because I was able to take that statistical engineering thinking and apply it to a concept I had never thought of in school. And looking at what the patterns were with crimes that were happening in the city, how we were able to use mapping to uncover some trends that you might not notice, and then of course using some statistical analysis on top of that. So it was something I really enjoyed a lot, but it was also something that kind of had a short life to it because there wasn't a lot of room to progress in that role. So other than I could keep doing the same thing for a couple of decades, but I did want to see where I could take my career.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, you have that need. The police department has that need, but yeah, what would you move up to? I mean, you're not a police officer, you're a civilian. Yeah, I could totally see what the
Yeah.
need to move to something else. So what did you do after that?
So that's when I made probably my biggest career move, and I decided to go after a large multinational corporation. And that's when I started working for Philips, Royal Philips, which is a Dutch company founded, back in the late 1800s as a lighting company. And what attracted me to them, other than that they had a job available that looked like I could do, in my local area, was that it was a large multinational company. They had industries at that time in everything from consumer electronics to lighting and healthcare, and they had offices all over the world doing business in over 100 countries. And so my thinking was, wow, if I get in there the opportunities will be endless. And that actually, at least for me, turned out to be a great move because I spent the next nearly 20 years at Philips working in different divisions. I worked in consumer electronics and healthcare. I got to spend some time at the corporate headquarters. I got to live in Amsterdam for a few years, so it was really a good experience. And that's actually where my engineering journey and technical journey turned more into HR, which was something I never would have planned.
Yeah, I mentioned in the intro, this guy has degrees in aerospace and industrial engineering, especially the aerospace. Is like he ended up in HR. So how did you end up in HR?
That's a great question. That's asked myself that often. But who let the engineer in HR? So what happened was I ended up getting a certification as a project management professional from the PMI Project Management Institute, and again that was that engineering process background, how things work, how you get things done. And I started getting assigned to big transformation projects. So that involved sometimes restructuring or moving operations, opening facilities, closing facilities, mergers and acquisitions, things of that nature. And I was assigned as a project management support to help the HR team, where they just didn't have those skills or capabilities or the bandwidth to manage those things. And so the more I got assigned to those projects, the more I learned about how HR works, and spent a lot of time with HR people and started learning more and more about HR. And so I ended up moving from business transformation formally into HR roles. So I think my first official HR role was as director of organizational effectiveness in the healthcare sector. And it really came from spending a lot of time looking to see how things worked. What did it take to have an effective team? What was the structure? What were the measurements that you use? What were the leadership styles? And that was a lot of things I learned from engineering and project management, and this really started applying that in the field of HR. And at that time there weren't as many data geeks in HR as there are now. Analytics were very limited, and so it was kind of unusual to have somebody that was had a background like mine, very technical and analytical in nature, in the HR function. So that was kind of novel at the time, and so that helped me bring some skills to that function that they didn't necessarily have, and allowed me the chance to learn a whole lot from them that I'd never experienced.
I'm really curious now, Chris. How did you navigate the personalities in HR as opposed to working in, I guess, around more technically minded people, or was there any difference at all?
There's always a difference, and that's one of the good things I learned as a project manager is getting to work with those different personalities. And I don't ever like to pigeonhole people and say all engineers are like XYZ, but there are some generalities that many people in certain fields exhibit. And so we know a lot of times in engineering, sometimes we seem more reserved because we're analytical, we're thinking, we're maybe in the background even on some things. That's not always the case, but many times it's the case. HR, on the other hand, you think of, which again is also not the case, but many people think, that's the touchy feely. They're always out, smiling, and, unless they're having to lay people off, which isn't unfortunately part of the job sometimes, that, they're the ones, throwing the party planning committee. But, the truth about HR is, couldn't be farther from the truth. These are, for the most part, they're business professionals, and they're working on behalf of employees and the organization at the same time. So they're filling kind of a space that they're trying to support both ends of that at the same time, which is definitely not easy. And so the personalities that help me learn a little bit and probably come out of my engineering shell, if I can use that terminology, to learn that that's okay to be a little bit different, and it's okay that if I want to sit in the corner and be quiet and absorb things, and let somebody else that is more extroverted maybe take the lead and talk a little bit more. And through that experience, I'm actually very introverted to begin with, at an early age, but now I do speaking and facilitate team meetings, and so it's something I've learned to be more comfortable with over time, and a lot of that was thanks to hanging out with those HR people.
Wonderful. So what was the motivation to start Escape to Expand?
So after I left Phillips, I thought that I did want to do some consulting, strike out on my own, see how I could do. And I thought, well, what are the parts that I love most about what I've done, the past 20 or 30 years? And that was around teamwork, helping people come together from different backgrounds, different disciplines to help them unleash their full potential. And so that's really what I focused on was kind of a team coaching, doing facilitation modules where I can work with people and teams to help them learn to work together themselves. And that's really where it started from.
What's the typical issue that you help teams with?
Great question. It's a wide variety of topics. So, one great example is if you have a new leader coming into a team and they have to, find out, what are the dynamics of the existing team, and the team wants to find out what, how's this new leader going to work in our team. And so helping bridge that conversation and realize, that the different styles aren't bad, that, different can sometimes be good. That's one thing that I love working with is when you have that new team member or especially a new leader coming into a team. Another situation we see a lot is where teams just don't seem to be coalescing. So it's not an out and out toxic relationship. If something's that bad, usually bringing in somebody from the outside is not going to help at that point. But usually it's where things are okay, but they could be better. And so really helping people again connect, how do they deal with conflict constructively? How does the team recharge? How do they focus on goals together? Those are the types of things I love to work with groups on.
Is there ever an instance where the people that you're working with, at least some of them, are resistant to what you're trying to do? And if so, how do you deal with that situation?
It's a great question. And usually there's, different ranges of resistance, and it can be just from, who's this person from the outside? They don't know who we are. And that's usually most of the resistance I see. But a lot of times it's just getting people to open up for the possibility. Well, let's listen and see where this goes. And after an hour, let's revisit to see if you think this is really helping or not. And what I see with most teams is most people, if they don't come along with it originally, you can also, there's a little bit of peer pressure as well, where the rest of the team says, hey, we want to give this a chance. We want to see what we can learn. Why don't you come along with us as well? So depending on the dynamics of the team, it's not always just me or the leader. It can also be the peer influence of those other people on the team where, somebody else says, hey, I'll try this workshop first or try this new technique out and let's see how it works.
How do you know if what you're doing is working?
Great question, because at the end of the day, as a external consultant, speaker, if somebody's not paying me, then otherwise I'm just doing this pro bono, and my wife's not happy. So I want to make sure that I'm giving value back to the organizations and people I work with. And one way I do that is with a team survey. So at the very start of my working with them, it's about a 30 question survey that I use, and it looks at the various elements of how the team works well together or how it doesn't work well together. And that's part of what we use to help diagnose, along with interviews and focus groups, help diagnose what areas we want to look at first as I work with them. And then after that, we can, repeat that survey or parts of that survey to see, hey, are we making progress over time? And that's usually what we do is kind of set up a recurring, if it's um, usually I wouldn't do every month, but maybe every quarter, come back and do, 5 or 6 questions, whatever those key topics were, and see, is the team making progress? Next to that, of course, there's the feedback that I get from the individuals, hey, this was a great event, or here's some things we can make a little bit better. Always looking for feedback to see how I can make not just my work better, but make it applicable to whoever that client is.
I was once speaking to a consultant, Chris, and she said that she was working with a company, and afterwards she did a survey and found that 76% of the employees were satisfied with the company. And I thought, that's you hold a party, right? But no, she said, what about the other 24%? And then I spoke to another consultant who said that typically about 80% of a company is satisfied with the company. And that's about as good as you can get. There's always going to be disgruntled people or people who think that things could be better. But who do you fall, I guess, when it comes to the work that you do, who do you fall more in line with? The person that was concerned with the other 24 or the person who says 80 is as good as it gets?
I think you've got to be concerned with both. And that's easy to say sometimes and hard to do. But I think if you look especially at numbers right now, employee disengagement or engagement, depending on how you want to look at the numbers, it's not that great. So sometimes there's always going to be a group of people that are looking to move on to something else. And if those are people you want to keep in your organization, then those are people you want to spend some extra time with. Hey, why aren't you happy? Are there things we could do that we can change that's going to work for you? Sometimes that's possible. A lot of times that's not. That's something that maybe the company can't change or the manager can't change. And in that case, you kind of have to say, well, that becomes a regretted loss. At the end of the day, though, you've got the 80% of people or 75% that are there every day, doing their job, a lot of times going above and beyond. Make sure you're recognizing those people and keeping them engaged. So it is kind of a two-way street, but at the end of the day, I would much rather focus on the people that are committed to the company, that have alignment with the vision that the company has. And I found that having that common why together, the purpose, why am I part of this company? Because the company's doing something that I believe in. That's a very powerful motivator versus I'm only doing this job because it's a good paycheck,
Yeah.
because somebody else is going to offer a bigger paycheck guaranteed at some point. But if there's some other reason that I want to stay and be part of that company, it could be the people I work with, I enjoy, that's another big motivator. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. But yeah, I would rather, focus on the 80% I have that are committed, and maybe a few of those others that I need to worry about.
Indeed, indeed. All right. So if you're a technical person who's listening or watching our conversation, Chris, and they think, I've been doing the technical role for some time, but I want to be like Chris. I want to make a move to something that perhaps isn't that outside of the field that I'm currently in. What kind of traits do you have to have, or the skills that you have to make that happen?
Great question, Neil. I think one of those is curiosity, which is, to me, a great hallmark of a lot of technical people, especially engineers. We want to know how things work. And so for me, curiosity of, well, how does HR work? It's kind of just seems like uh, invisible bubble or whatever that other thing is, if it's supply chain, if it's, being a CEO, CFO, whatever those things are that interest you, go spend some time with those people, learn, what are the things they're worried about? What are the things that they do to learn? And what I found really helped me was bring those skills that you have already that maybe that person or that function or that group doesn't necessarily have. So, what can your skills and your background in, in the technical field, how can that skill set be applied maybe in a different area? And then you can get into those partnerships where they're teaching you some of their background and things maybe you didn't have a chance to learn, and you're bringing in some skills that they didn't have access to already. So that combination, I think, is a good powerful bridge into stepping into something a little different.
Chris, when I started this podcast and YouTube channel, it was because I really wanted to hear from people who are like myself, saw the benefit of improving at communicating with others, people with technical roles. Were you always good at public speaking or at communicating with others? And if not, what did you do to get better at it?
Yeah, not really. I liked, comedy and making people laugh, but I was not a stand-up comedian or anything like that. So, I was much more happier, sitting in a group and being part of a conversation than standing up front and leading a conversation. And a lot of that was just some practice. It was watching other people, watching other speakers, and saying, "Oh, that's interesting. I like the way they did that. But I think I could do that." The one thing that really helped me the most was the first time that I stood in front of a big audience at a conference. It was with somebody else, with a co-presenter that had done it before. And so what this helped me was, I knew the technical stuff. I knew what all the slides were. I knew all the stories, but it was the, standing up in front of the audience, all the eyes on you and those nervous things that you have, the performance anxiety, what if they asked a question I don't know the answer to, all those things that go through your mind. But having someone else on stage with me, it gave me a little bit of comfort. Hey, there's a backup. If I fumble, they're going to be there to back me up. I can help them if they need it. So that to me was a kind of an aha moment that you don't have to do it alone. And so that kind of helped me break out of that shell a little bit. And then it really was just practicing and finding opportunities. Speaking, doing a leadership team meeting where there were 12 people in the room and leading dialogue on a topic on that. And that, taught me how do you tell a story? How do you create things that are interesting? Bringing in data, but don't forget the emotional impact or the business impact of what that data means. And so a lot of that was from small group interactions, and then just kind of scaled those things to say, well, how could I turn this into, a presentation that I could give in front of a larger group? And so I took maybe presentations I had used at work and said, well, here's some examples I can use. Of course, nothing that's proprietary or confidential, but, here's some things I've learned. And I can, tell an interesting story that I think could help someone else. And just practicing that and asking for feedback. That's a big one.
When it comes to the work that you do now, Chris, do you have a process for putting your presentations together? And if so, what is it?
I do, and I'm sure everybody is a little different. For me, I use PowerPoint, but I love to just dump ideas into PowerPoint. So whatever my thinking is, I typically, I'm from the South and, went to church as a kid. So we learned the three, open 3 points and a close was what we were exposed to all the time growing up. And I found that effective for me. So I usually start with that framework, introduction. What's this thing I'm talking about? Usually about three big points that I want to go through. And then what's the close? How do I bring people about? What's the change I'm helping them with, or what's the question I want them to answer? And once I start putting those things into PowerPoint, the reason I like PowerPoint is I can create one thought per slide, and then I can move those around very easily. So I can start practicing and think about what are the words I'm actually going to say for this point. And then, well, that doesn't quite feel right after I say those words, and it's easy to change things around. The main thing for me though is just to practice, practice, practice. So I'll go through the same set of slides, maybe 10 times, over a couple of weeks. Um, I may do it a couple of times one day, then I'll take a break, step away from it for a while, and kind of let my mind become clear, and then go back into it. And what I found for me is if I just read through a slide with my mind and not my mouth, it sounds really good. And then when I start speaking the words, maybe what looked good on paper or on the slide doesn't come across as well in speaking. And so I found for me, I actually, even just sitting here by myself, talking out loud and speaking at the same pace I think I would do with an audience. And it helps me find the pauses that I want to put in, to give people a chance to react or let a point soak in, or again to say, that transition between those 2 points didn't really flow as well as I thought it would. So let me change that up.
Nice. You mentioned nerves earlier in our conversation, Chris. How do you manage them when you have to give a presentation?
So, every time I get ready to speak, I always have a little bit of nervousness, and quite frankly, that's not a bad thing because that actually releases some chemicals in your body as long as you can help control it. It does help a little bit with the presentation. So there's a couple of things I learned years ago. Um, the kinesthetic, the power your body has, and so taking power poses and rah, rah, doing some little exercises like that. It looks a little silly sometimes, but it really helps loosen the tension in the body and get some of those endorphins going and a little bit of the positive chemicals to get ready to speak. The other thing I found for me is the first minute or two are usually the most nerve-wracking for me because that's again is the technology working or is the lighting working? Am I speaking at the right pace? So that's the point to me I'm the most nervous. So I usually try to rehearse that first minute or two so it's down pat. So I don't have to think about that first minute or so, that it just gives me a chance to calm down and get in the groove and then be my calm self.
Wonderful. For the people who are watching and listening to our conversation, Chris, and they are thinking getting better at speaking in front of others is something, well, perhaps it's something that I want to do. What would be the reason that you'd give them to actually go ahead and do so?
Wow, there's so many good reasons. First of all, is I know you've got some great experiences out there that other people can benefit from. You've learned something. Whoever's sitting on the other side of their computer watching this, there's things you've experienced or have learned that nobody else knows or nobody else has experienced the same way you have. And so, sharing those experiences is a great way to connect with other people and also help inspire them to be a little bit more like you and to be like us as engineers. And I think, that's one of the good things in the last few years, with the focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. There's a lot more young kids now coming up that want to be involved in engineering or programming or artificial intelligence or robots or whatever that technical field is that they're excited about. And I think that's one of the things that we with the technical background can help inspire that younger generation coming up. So that's another great reason. The other one is you make some good friends. Neil, we've only known each other for what, maybe a week and a half now. We met in another forum, and and now we've connected and we're learning from each other. So it's also kind of a neat community to be a part of, where you can keep learning from each other.
Excellent. This has been a great conversation, Chris. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
Uh, Thanks a lot for asking, Neil. Right up here, you can see my yeah, my website's escapetoexpand.com. So feel free to hit there. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Chris Whaley, and happy to connect with anyone that's interested in learning more about my journey, or if I can help give a few tips out there, I'm always happy to share.
Excellent. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.